Listen, there was a man standing at the locked Forest Service gate when she pulled up. Dark green coat, brass buttons, standing perfectly still with his back to her headlights. She recognized that coat before she recognized anything else. She'd helped carry the folding chairs at the funeral 3 weeks earlier. The gate was chained. The road was too narrow to reverse quickly in the dark, and she had no cell signal. She got home that night. She sold her family's property the following month and never went back to that county. But to understand what she was doing on that road after dark, you have to go back to that afternoon. She had grown up about 40 minutes from that property, in a part of southwestern Virginia where the county roads don't always match the county maps, and where inherited land has a way of sitting on families like a second mortgage nobody discusses. The cabin and the few acres around it had belonged to her grandmother, then her mother, and now her, and she had been putting off the listing appointment for the better part of 2 years. That October afternoon, she finally drove up to photograph the porch rot and check the well cover and do the kind of quiet accounting you do with a place before you let it go. She stopped for gas at the only station in town, the kind with 2 pumps and a screen door that doesn't close all the way, and a register that still uses carbon paper. The man behind the counter, older gray work shirt, didn't look directly at her, asked which road she was taking up the mountain. When she told him, he set down the pen he was holding and said she should be back before the light goes. She thanked him. She was not back before the light went. The property itself was ordinary enough in the afternoon. The porch had buckled in 2 places, the well cover had a crack along one side, and the tree line behind the house had crept about 10 feet closer than she remembered. She spent longer than she planned. She photographed everything, walked the fence line, checked the old root cellar behind the house just to make sure the latch was still holding. By the time she got back in the truck and turned down the hollow toward the county road, the sun was already behind the ridge, and the light had gone that flat gray-blue color that doesn't give you much time. She wasn't worried. She knew the road. She had driven it in worse conditions. The hollow narrowed as she descended, the way Appalachian hollows do, the walls coming in on both sides, the hardwoods closing overhead, and the light dropping faster than it would on open ground. The road was 1 lane with occasional wide spots scraped out of the bank for passing, and it ran for about 2 miles before it met the Forest Service road, and then another 1.5 miles to the county blacktop. She'd made this drive more times than she could count. She saw the gate in her headlights from about 50 yards out. There was a shape standing in front of it. Her first thought was hiker. The Forest Service gate closed at dusk, and it happened that people misjudged the time and found themselves on the wrong side of a chain lock. She had seen it before. She pulled up slowly and stopped with maybe 20 feet between her front bumper and the figure, headlights full on, and she tapped the horn once, just a light tap, the way you do when you want to get someone's attention without startling them. The figure didn't move. It was facing away from her. Dark green canvas coat, long, with brass buttons down the front and a collar turned up against the cold. She could see it clearly in the headlights. The posture was slightly forward, shoulders relaxed, the way a person stands when they're looking at something they've been looking at for a while. She recognized the coat before her brain caught up with what that meant. Earl Combs had owned that coat for 30 years. She had known Earl Combs her entire life. He had lived in the 3rd house past the church on the county road, kept 2 hounds and a kitchen garden, and was the kind of man who remembered every birthday in a 6-mile radius. She had gone to his viewing on a Tuesday, the service on a Wednesday, and had helped his daughter stack the folding chairs afterward. He had been buried in that coat because his daughter said he would have wanted it. The funeral director had buttoned it all the way up. She sat with her hand on the window crank. The figure turned. Not quickly, not sharply. It rotated at the pace of someone who has all the time they need, a smooth and even motion, and the face came around into the edge of the headlight beam. The light was strongest at chest level, and she could see the coat buttons, the collar, the set of the shoulders, but the face stayed just above the edge of where the light was strongest, in that thin layer between illumination and shadow, where shapes are readable but details are not. She did not roll the window down. She did not know, later, what stopped her hand. She told the person she eventually shared this account with that it wasn't fear exactly, not yet. It was something in the geometry of the turn. Something that wasn't quite wrong but wasn't quite right either. The way a word sounds, almost like the word you know but isn't. Her hand stayed on the crank and didn't move. The road behind her was 2 miles of one-lane hollow. No shoulder to speak of. Reversing in the dark around blind curves was the kind of thing that ended with a truck in a ditch and nobody within cell range to call. She knew all of that. She sat there for what she later estimated was about 30 seconds, though it felt like much longer, and then she heard her name. Not shouted, not called. Spoken, clearly, through the closed window and the engine noise and the distance between them. In the way old people say a name they've known a long time, with all the syllables given equal weight. The middle one not swallowed the way younger people say it. The full version. Her full name. The way Earl Combs had said it every time he flagged her down on the county road to ask after her mother. She put the truck in reverse. She did not look away from the figure. She backed down that hollow road in the dark with her eyes on the gate and the shape standing in front of it, watching in the rear view only enough to keep her tires on the road, and the shape did not follow. It did not move at all. By the time she had backed far enough that her headlights no longer reached the gate, she could not see it anymore, and she kept going until gravel turned to blacktop and the pavement of the county road felt solid under her tires. She drove home without stopping. She did not call anyone that night. The following month, she called the real estate agent and said the road had a drainage problem and she wanted to price it to move. The agent didn't ask questions. The closing was handled by mail. On her last drive through the county, she stopped for gas at the same station on her way out. The same man was behind the counter. He looked at her once, the same careful sideways look he'd given her before, and said nothing while she paid. She was at the door when he spoke. One word. Good. She didn't ask him what he meant by that. She thinks now that she already knew, or that some part of her had known since the moment she'd sat in that truck with her hand on the window crank and decided, for a reason she still cannot name with any precision, not to roll it down. Whatever was standing at that gate knew her name, the full version, the weight of each syllable exactly right. What she cannot explain, what she has turned over many times since, is how it also knew to stop when she put the truck in reverse. Some things, she said, stop when you don't give them what they're waiting for. She doesn't know what it was waiting for. She is glad she doesn't know. The next account comes from a different county, a different road, a different family entirely. But the man who told it waited until he was 63 years old to say it out loud. He said he waited that long because he needed to be sure his children were grown and out of the mountains first. The cabin had been listed as a seasonal retreat, private hollow, sleeps 4, no pets. He found it on a rental site in late September, when the rates drop and the photos still show the leaves turning and everything looks like a reason to go somewhere quiet. The price was low enough that he didn't ask many questions. He was recently divorced. The apartment he'd moved into was still mostly boxes, and the idea of a week alone in the mountains with nothing required of him felt less like a vacation and more like a medical necessity. He drove up on a Friday afternoon, a cooler in the back seat, and a paper bag of groceries wedged against it. The kind of provisions a man puts together when he's not cooking for anyone. Soup cans, crackers, coffee. One good steak he told himself he'd make on the first night and didn't. The directions the owner had texted him ended with, "Bear left at the concrete block building. The road gets narrow, you'll see the drive." The concrete block building turned out to be the ruin of something. Walls still standing, but the roof long gone, and the road did get narrow, dropping into a hollow where the trees came up close on both sides, and the late afternoon light barely reached the ground. The cabin was small and solid, built from cut logs that had gone dark with age, with a covered porch across the front and a wood stove inside that the owner said kept the place warm as long as you didn't let it die overnight. He pulled the cooler up the porch steps, found the key under the second board from the door where the owner said it would be, and let himself in. The place smelled like wood smoke and something underneath that, damp, old, the smell of a building that has been closed up through multiple seasons. He lit the stove, checked the water at the sink, unloaded the groceries onto the small kitchen counter. The cabin had a main room with the stove and a couch and a table, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, a bathroom that was functional if not comfortable, and 2 doors off the back of the main room. The first opened into a bedroom with a bed and a chest of drawers. The second was the back room. It was nailed shut. 3 finishing nails hammered into the top of the door frame at an angle to catch the door face, the way you'd do it if you needed it done quickly and didn't have a hasp and padlock. 2 of the nails were seated cleanly. The third was slightly bent, the head skewed, like whoever put it in had been working fast or working in poor light or both. He tried the door, the nails held, and then found the guest book on the kitchen table. Spiral-bound, water-stained at the bottom right corner, the kind of book that accumulates over years of different handwriting and different seasons. He poured a cup of coffee from the thermos he'd brought and sat down to read it. This is something he always did in rental properties. He said it made a place feel less anonymous. Most of the entries were what you'd expect. Couples from Richmond and Charlotte and Roanoke who'd come for the fall color or a long weekend away from something. A family with 2 kids who'd seen a black bear crossing the road below the hollow. A retired couple from Tennessee who came back 3 years running and noted their return in each entry like a small, private tradition. He read through most of it. The last entry was dated 11 months earlier. It said, "Don't go in the back room after midnight. I am not joking. Leave the door nailed." No name, no other detail. Just the 2 sentences, written in a careful, level hand. Someone who had taken time with the letters, which made it worse somehow. The fact that whoever wrote it had been deliberate. He called the owner. He wasn't alarmed exactly, but he mentioned the nails and the guest book entry, keeping his voice easy about it, the way you do when you don't want to sound like someone who is going to be a difficult renter. The owner picked up on the second ring and explained without hesitation that the back room had a water-damaged floor, an old French drain under the foundation that backed up sometimes and had warped the boards badly enough to be a liability. The nails were just to keep guests from walking in and going through the floor in the dark. He'd been meaning to fix it for 2 seasons. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. He thanked the owner and didn't mention the guest book entry again. He made soup instead of the steak, ate at the table with the guest book closed in front of him, and listened to the rain that had started while he was unpacking, slow and steady on the tin roof, the kind of sound that usually means a good night of sleep. By 8 o'clock, the hollow was completely dark outside the windows, and the porch light, which he'd switched on mostly out of habit, threw a yellow circle that reached the porch railing and no further. The tree line was invisible. At 9, he was reading. The stove ticked and breathed. The rain continued. Then, from behind the nailed door, a single knock. Not a bang, not a crash or a thump that might mean something had fallen. A knock, one knuckle on wood, the same sound you'd make on someone's front door if you wanted to be heard but didn't want to seem urgent. Deliberate, measured. He looked up from his book and looked at the door. The 3 nails were visible in the overhead light, the bent one still angled wrong. He sat and listened for another minute and heard nothing more. He told himself it was the drain. It was exactly the kind of sound an air pocket in an old pipe would make. A single pressure release, a thump against the pipe wall. He'd heard similar things in old houses his whole life. He went back to his book. At 11:10, the knock came again. Same sound, same single beat. He put his book down and looked at his phone for the time without planning to, the way you reach for your phone when something unsettles you and you need an ordinary object in your hand. He sat still and counted. He was not sure later why he started counting, only that he did, and that he reached 17 minutes and the knock came a third time. Same sound, same single beat, 17 minutes exactly. Old cabins make noise. He knew that. The rain had slowed but not stopped, and the stove was still settling, and drain systems and old foundations could produce sounds at regular intervals if the pressure built and released on a consistent cycle. He understood this. He sat with the book open in his lap and watched the door and came up with all of these explanations, and they were all reasonable, and they made the situation feel manageable, and he was almost convinced. He reached 17 minutes again, counted it out. 1 knock. He was now completely awake in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. He did not approach the door. He opened the stove and fed it another piece of wood and turned on the lamp on the table as well as the overhead light. He told himself the sounds were the drain. He told himself he would call the owner in the morning and ask him to come have a look, and that would be that. He was still telling himself that when the 4th interval ended. Only this time, it was not a knock. It was a voice. Low, without particular gender, the way a voice sounds when it's been muffled by a wall and distance. 1 sentence, maybe less than a sentence, just his name. Just that. Spoken clearly enough that there was no possibility of mishearing, no reasonable chance to reframe it as a pipe or a drain or air pressure or rain. His name, through a nailed door, from a room where the floor was supposedly too damaged to walk on. He sat in the lit cabin and did not breathe. He did not answer. He did not move toward the door. He sat in the chair with both lamps on and the stove putting out heat and his phone face up on the table in front of him. And he did not say a single word. The voice did not repeat. That was almost worse, the silence that came after. With the knocking, there had been a rhythm, something almost predictable, and predictable things can be reasoned with. The silence after his name had no rhythm. It had the quality of something that had said what it needed to say, and was now simply waiting to see what he would do about it. He did not do anything about it. He turned every light in the cabin on. The overhead in the main room, the lamp on the table, the light above the kitchen sink, the bathroom light, the light in the bedroom. He left the bedroom door open so the light spilled into the main room. He sat back in the chair with his phone in his hand and looked at the nailed door and listened. Nothing from the back room. Not a knock, not a voice, not the drain, if it had ever been the drain. The rain on the tin roof had dropped to a scattered tap. He could hear the hollow, the creak somewhere below the property, a branch moving against the side of the cabin. The particular silence that comes when an Appalachian hollow seals itself in after dark and the world outside the tree line ceases to exist. He was aware, in the way that awareness becomes physical, that his truck was parked in a gravel turnout that had been soft mud when he arrived and had not improved with 3 hours of rain. He thought about this for a while. He thought about the 2 miles of narrow road between the cabin and the county blacktop, with no shoulder and no passing room, and the hollow walls too steep and close to turn around on. Leaving, he understood, was theoretical. It would remain theoretical until morning dried the ground enough to risk the turnout. Around 2 in the morning, the back room produced a new sound. Not a knock. A drag, something moving across the floor with the slow, effortful sound of weight being shifted. A flat scraping against old boards, one direction, then a pause, then back. Like something finding the boundaries of a space. Like something pacing, if pacing is the right word for a movement that slow and that deliberate. He stood up from the chair. He stood in the center of the main room, between the stove and the table, and he listened to the dragging go one way and stop, and then come back the other way and stop. He counted 3 passes in each direction before it ceased. Then silence again. His hands were at his sides. He realized he was not breathing in any regular way and made himself take a slow breath and let it out. He did not approach the door. What he did instead, and he said this was not a decision exactly, more like something his hands did before he gave them instructions, was angle his phone camera flat along the floor and slide it halfway under the gap at the bottom of the door. The gap was narrow, less than an inch, but the phone's flashlight reached into the room. He could see disturbed dust in long lines, like something had dragged across the floor repeatedly. He could see the dark smear he could not identify, a stain, a streak, something that had been there for some time, or something that had not. He could see, at the far edge of the light, one partial print. Not a boot, not an animal track he recognized. Longer than his own foot, the arch compressed, 5 points at the toe end with no visible separation. The heel was clear in the dust, and the front was clear and the middle was not, the way a print looks when weight is centered. He pulled the phone back. He did not look at the photo again. He put his back against the far wall of the main room, the wall opposite the back room door, and he slid down it until he was sitting on the floor with his knees up and his phone in one hand and his truck keys in the other. He did not plan to sleep. He was not going to sleep. He kept the keys because having them in his hand meant he was ready to be somewhere else, even if somewhere else was not yet available to him. The dragging did not resume. At 3 in the morning exactly, by his phone clock, all sound from the back room stopped. Not faded, stopped. The way a machine stops when someone throws a switch. He noted the time because the precision of it bothered him. Not 3:01, not 2:58, but the exact turn of the hour, as if whatever was behind that door observed some schedule he was not aware of. After that, nothing. He sat against the wall until the light outside the window shifted from black to the gray. That means another hour until sunrise. And then he stood and packed everything without eating. He did not make coffee. He folded nothing. He put everything in the bag it came from, or the cooler it came from, and he carried it to the truck and loaded it, and came back for the second load. He checked the turnout. The surface had firmed in the night cold. He could get out if he went slowly. He drove to the nearest town with a phone signal and pulled into a gas station parking lot and called the owner. The owner answered and listened to everything. When he finished, there was a pause. Then the owner said it sounded like the drain. He said it more slowly this time, less immediately, and there was something in the pacing of it that was different from the night before, like a man repeating something he'd said before, not because he believed it, but because it was the thing he said. He mentioned the photo then. The partial print in the dust, inside a room no one had entered, the heel clear and the toe points visible, and the shape not quite matching anything he could name. The owner was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was probably a boot print from when they'd done the nailing. One of the workers must have gone in before they secured it. He asked the owner when the last time anyone had been inside the back room was. The owner said 2 years ago, before the water problem. He asked who. The owner said he didn't remember exactly. Some maintenance work. It was a while back. Then the owner said he hoped the rest of the stay had been comfortable and asked whether he wanted to apply the refund to a future booking. He said no. He drove home with the photo on his phone, the partial print, the dust lines, the dark smear he still cannot identify, and showed it to 2 people over the following weeks. One looked at it for a long time and said it was probably a boot print. Angle of the light made it look odd. The other one looked at it for about 3 seconds and said they didn't know what that was, and gave the phone back. The print is facing the door from the inside, heel toward the wall, toes toward the door. Whatever made it was standing at the door, not moving away from it. He did not add an entry to the guest book before he left. He thought about it. He sat at the table for a moment with the pen and the book open and thought about writing something, a warning, the way the person before him had written one, and then thought about all the people who would come after him and read it and decide it was a joke, the way he had. He closed the book and left it on the table. The cabin listing, he checked some months later, still shows the property as Sleeping 4. The photos include a bright, well-lit image of the main room and the kitchen and the bedroom. There is no photo of the back room. There never was, he noticed, going back through the original listing. It had not been photographed because it had not been available. The listing simply did not mention it. He rents cabins sometimes still when he travels. The first thing he does before he unpacks or checks the stove or looks at the view is read the guest book all the way to the last entry. He does not touch doors with unusual hardware. Every account so far had happened to someone alone. The next one did not involve just one person. It involved 2, and the man who submitted it said that having a second person there made it worse, not better. Not because they couldn't keep each other calm, because it meant there was no way to tell himself he'd imagined it. They had been planning the trip since July, which is to say they had been talking about it since July, and had actually done the planning in about 45 minutes the week before they left. 2 friends, both in their mid-20s, both the kind of people who camp a few times a year and know enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be careful. They had their gear, they had a general idea of the area, and they had 3 days off in late August that weren't going to use themselves. The trailhead was in a national forest in the eastern part of West Virginia, the kind of place that shows up on dispersed camping lists without much additional description. No fee, no permit required, no amenities. A gravel pullout, a metal post with a brown fiberglass sign, and a trail that went up into the trees and became the mountains the way Appalachian trails do. Quickly, steeply, without apology. The trail register was bolted to the post. It was a standard-issue aluminum box, the kind that holds a pen on a chain and a stack of pre-printed cards, and they stopped to sign in the way you're supposed to, filling out their names and the date and the number in their party and their expected return. There were maybe 30 entries ahead of theirs, going back several months. He flipped through them. The first camper, call him that, the one who told this account, while the second camper shouldered his pack and looked up the trail. Most entries were routine, groups and pairs and solo hikers, destinations and dates, a few notes about trail conditions after a wet spring. 4 entries back from theirs, someone had written a destination and a date, and then, below the standard fields, a note in smaller letters. Don't whistle after dark up here. Serious. No further explanation. No name beyond the initials in the standard field. The second camper, reading over his shoulder, laughed. Not mockingly, just the easy laugh of someone who has read too many self-serious trail register warnings and filed them next to the ones about leaving no trace and not feeding the wildlife. He capped the pen and dropped it back in the box and said they should get moving before the good sites were taken, which was almost certainly not a concern on a Tuesday in late August, but they went. The hike was about 2 miles to the ridge, gaining maybe 800 feet along a trail that switchbacked through second-growth hardwoods before breaking out into an open ridgeline with the views west into the valley. They found a dispersed site on the ridge itself, a flat patch of ground with a rock ring fire area that had been used before, set back from the trail by maybe 50 feet and sheltered on the north and east sides by the tree line. A good site. The kind of site that makes you feel like you found something rather than arrived somewhere. They set up the tent while there was still good light. A 2-man dome, orange, the kind of bright color that seemed reasonable when purchased and always feels slightly loud in the actual woods. Sleeping pads, bags, headlamps staged inside the door flap. Food bag tied and hung on a branch about 100 yards back from camp, far enough. Fire built in the rock ring with wood they gathered from the tree line. They ate and talked and watched the light go out of the valley below, and the first stars come in from the east. By 10, they were in the tent with the fire burned down to coals. He was not asleep. He rarely slept well the first night in a new place. Something about calibrating to the sounds. And he was lying on his back listening to the ridge settle into its nighttime version of itself when the whistle came. One long note, one short. From the east, below the ridge, where the tree line dropped steeply away into dark. Distant enough to be clear, but not close. 100 yards, maybe more. The kind of distance where sound carries without effort in cold air. He sat up. The second camper was already awake. They listened. Nothing more. The night sounds of the ridge, insects, a light wind moving through the treetops, the distant sound of what might have been an owl, continued as if nothing had interrupted them. Safety whistle, he thought. Other campers somewhere below them on the slope. The trail was open, the area was legal for dispersed use, and people sometimes camped at lower elevations along the drainage rather than committing to the ridge climb. People lost their groups sometimes and used their whistles. It was a reasonable explanation, and he offered it, and the second camper agreed with it, and they lay back down. 40 minutes later, he knew because he checked his phone, 40 minutes and not much more, the whistle came again. One long note, one short, from the west. He sat up again, and this time he did not have an explanation ready. The western side of the ridge dropped toward a hollow that was dark and steep and not, as far as either of them knew from the trail map, marked for camping. Getting from the eastern slope to the western slope in 40 minutes on that terrain in complete darkness was not impossible, but it was fast. Very fast, and the sound had not come from above them or below them on the ridge itself, where a person moving along the trail might plausibly have relocated. It had come from the same distance, the same volume, below the ridge on the opposite side. The second camper said quietly, "That's not the same person." He didn't answer immediately. He was working through the geometry and finding that the geometry did not cooperate. Either there were two separate people with safety whistles on opposite sides of the ridge, which was possible, or one person had moved between those positions in 40 minutes in the dark, which was fast, or something else was happening that he was not prepared to name at 11:15 on a Tuesday night on a ridge in West Virginia. Then he remembered the trail register, the note in smaller letters. He didn't say it out loud. He looked at the second camper, and the second camper looked back at him, and neither of them said, "Don't whistle back," but neither of them whistled. They lay in the dark tent and listened. The insects continued. The wind moved through the canopy. He was tracking the sounds the way you track sounds when something has shifted and you don't know back to what yet, sorting everything into known and unknown categories and paying attention to the ratio between them. And then, a thought that arrived late, The way the important thoughts sometimes do, he replayed both whistles in his head. The first one long, one short. The second one, he heard it again in his memory, ran it back the way you run a sound back when it mattered. One short, one long, reversed. The first whistle was long-short. The second whistle was short-long. He had not registered this in the moment, had been too focused on the location and not enough on the sequence. But he was certain of it now. He had been hearing it without hearing it. That was not two people using safety whistles independently. That was a pattern. A call and a response across a ridge, with two people in a tent between them. The second camper had gone very still. His breathing had slowed to the deliberate kind. He was about to say something. He didn't know what. Something quiet and practical about waiting until morning and heading down at first light, when the east wall of the tent pressed inward. Not at the top, not the whole wall. A single point of pressure maybe 2 feet off the ground, level with where a hand would be if someone were crouching outside. The orange nylon pushed inward and held. Not wind. Wind would have moved the whole surface. This was a point. A deliberate point of contact, steady and held. The pressure lasted for a count of 3, then it released. The wall went slack, and the tent was just a tent again, and the ridge was quiet in the way that follows something, not in the way that precedes nothing. Neither of them breathed. Whatever was outside the east wall of the tent was not making any other sound. No footstep, no branch, no displaced gravel from the rock ring. Something that large, that close, producing no sound at all. That was the part, the first camper said when he told this account, that he still could not explain. Not the whistles and not the geometry and not even the pressure on the wall. The silence. The absolute, complete silence of something that should have made noise. The pressure had released, but neither of them moved. He was counting seconds without meaning to, the same way he had counted the interval between the whistles. His mind running its own record of events because that was what it had decided to do and he was not in charge of it anymore. The second camper's headlamp was in his hand. Not on, just in his hand. 47 minutes. That was how long they sat without moving after the wall went slack. He tracked it on his phone screen, the display dimmed to almost nothing, the numbers changing in the dark. 47 minutes of ridge silence, the insects, the wind in the canopy, nothing else. And then the east began to go gray, and he let himself breathe in a different way. The footsteps came at 4:15. Slow, deliberate. From the north side of the camp, where the tree line was closest, moving along the outside perimeter of the site. One step, a pause, another step. Not the random movement of an animal covering ground. Animals move with purpose. They go somewhere. Their footfalls reflect direction. These had no direction. They circled. He could track the sound moving from the north around to the east, pausing at the east wall where the pressure had been, then continuing south, then west, then north again. One full circuit. He lay still and listened to something walk a complete circle around the tent in the dark. Then a second circuit. Same pace. Same pauses at the east wall. At the start of what should have been a third circuit, the footsteps stopped at the door side, the south-facing side, where the zipper and the flap were. He had his hand on the interior zipper pull before he knew he'd moved it. The second camper's hand was already there. They held it between them in the dark, both of them with fingers around the pull, and neither of them let go. The zipper began to move from outside. Upward, slowly, the slider tracking along the teeth with the small metallic sound that a tent zipper makes. A sound he had heard 1,000 times in ordinary circumstances and had never once found frightening. He found it frightening now. He found the slowness of it specifically frightening. Not a quick grab, not an impatient pull, but a measured, deliberate movement that suggested something with patience enough to go carefully. The second camper pulled back against it, both hands on the pull now. One hard tug from outside. The zipper jerked upward, maybe 2 inches, and stopped. Then nothing. No second pull, no voice, no movement against the tent fabric. The zipper held where it was, 2 inches open at the bottom of the flap, and whatever had moved it did not try again. He held the pull until his hand ached. He held it until the gray outside the tent had gone pale enough to see the outline of the trees through the orange nylon, and then pale enough to see individual branches, and then bright enough to mean that what was outside the tent was now visible to whatever was out there. They unzipped the tent together. One movement, both of them, his hand and the second camper's hand on the pull. They came out low and looked. The campsite was undisturbed. The fire ring held cold ash. The food bag was still hanging where they'd put it. Their boots were outside the tent door where they'd left them the night before, toes pointing away from the tent the way you leave boots when you take them off, stepping inside. Except the boots were pointing toward the tent. Both pairs. His and the second camper's, arranged with the toes facing inward toward the door, as if someone had turned them around in the night. He stood and looked at them for a moment, and then looked at the second camper, and the second camper looked at the boots and then looked away at the tree line, the same way you look away from something when looking at it directly feels like too much acknowledgement. The prints were visible in the soft earth and the flattened grass around the tent. Not a clean track. The ground was too mixed, too much leaf litter and root, but impressions, the pressed-down record of weight distributed over a path. The path circled the tent. He could trace it, moving around the outside, past the east wall, around the south side to the door. At the door side, the impressions deepened, the way they deepen when something stands in one place for a long time. The impressions circled the tent twice. He walked the path and confirmed it, counting himself around the perimeter twice. Then the path ended at the fire ring. At the fire ring, nothing. No continuation, no tracks moving away from camp into the tree line or down the slope. The circle ended, and the ground beyond the fire ring showed nothing. He photographed the boots. He photographed the impressions. He photographed the fire ring and the absence of anything beyond it. They packed in silence, which is a different thing from packing quietly. Packing quietly means you're being considerate. Packing in silence means you have agreed without discussion that there is nothing useful to say. They broke the tent down and compressed the sleeping bags and loaded their packs in under 20 minutes and walked down the trail without looking back at the site. At the trailhead, before they loaded the packs into the car, he stopped at the register box. He had been thinking about the entry on the way down, the note in smaller letters, the 2 sentences, the word serious underlined. He opened the box and flipped through the cards. He had missed a second entry. 3 pages after the whistle warning, an entry dated 2 years earlier, different handwriting, different initials. A destination and a date filled out in the standard fields. And below the standard fields, in letters slightly larger than the fields required, as if the person had needed the emphasis. We heard it too, 2019, got out at dawn, don't whistle back, don't let it in. He stood at the trailhead and read it twice. 2 separate groups, 2 separate years, the same ridge, the same sequence, the same instruction at the end. Neither entry referred to the other, they couldn't have, written 2 years apart. And yet they arrived at the same 2 sentences as if those sentences were the only thing worth leaving. He photographed that entry too. They drove down the mountain and stopped at a gas station at the first town, and sat in the parking lot for a while without getting out. He told the second camper about the reversed whistle pattern, long short from the east, short long from the west, and the second camper nodded slowly, like a man receiving information he had already suspected. Neither of them used the word for what they thought it might mean. Later, when he described the encounter to a ranger contact he knew through a mutual friend, the ranger suggested black bear. Unusual vocalizations, he said, were not uncommon, and bears were capable of producing sounds that a person under stress might parse as structured. The boots could have been moved by a curious animal rooting around camp. The impressions were consistent with a large animal circling a food-scented site. He listened to all of this carefully. He did not argue with any of it. What he said, after a pause, was that he'd been camping for 12 years, and he had shared campsites with bears before, and bears left claw marks in their tracks. Every bear print he had ever seen had 5 toes and 5 claw marks in front of them, small indentations in the soil just ahead of the toe pads, because bears do not retract their claws. The impressions around the tent had 5 toes, no claw marks. He still has the photographs, the register entry, the impressions, the boots turned inward. He said he keeps them in a folder on his phone that he does not often open. He checks trail registers fully now, before any trailhead, every entry to the last page. He carries a safety whistle on every trip. He has never used it after dark. The register at that trailhead, as far as he knows, is still there. The entries are still in it. He did not tear the pages out. He thought about it at the trailhead that morning, and then decided that whoever came next would probably read them the same way he had, the first time anyway, and make their own choice. The last time he checked, someone had drawn a single horizontal line across the page below the 2021 entry. Below the line, the remaining cards were blank. Every account so far involved someone who could leave when it was over. The next one is different. The next one is about someone whose job was to stay. She had worked seasonal positions with the Forest Service for 6 years before the Tennessee posting, which was long enough to have developed the particular practical competence of someone who has spent real time in the backcountry without romanticizing it. She knew how to read weather on a ridge. She knew how radio propagation behaved during temperature inversions, and how to write an incident report that would satisfy a district supervisor, and how to tell the difference between a hiker who was tired and a hiker who was in genuine trouble. She did not scare easily. She mentioned this not as a boast, but as context, the way a mechanic might tell you they know what a healthy engine sounds like before describing the noise that concerned them. The fire tower assignment was a storm watch rotation, late September, one of the last of the season before the district closed the elevated positions for winter. The tower was a standard cab-on-stilts design, 60 feet up, accessible by a switchback metal staircase that rang like a bell in the wind. The cab itself was maybe 14 feet square, a wraparound catwalk, windows on all 4 sides, a swivel chair in the center that had been there since the 1970s, a small table, a cot against the south wall, and the radio equipment on a dedicated shelf with its own power supply. She arrived in the late afternoon and ran her equipment check while there was still enough light to see the ridgeline clearly. Visibility good, maybe 15 miles to the southwest. The storm front was moving in from that direction, forecasted to arrive sometime between midnight and 3, and her job was to monitor, log, and report any fire starts in the event that lightning preceded rain significantly enough to create ignition risk. It was not glamorous work. It was necessary work, and she was good at it. She logged her check-in with district at 6 p.m., ate a sandwich she'd brought in her pack, and settled into the routine of a tower shift. The slow pan of the windows, the weather log entries at the top of each hour, the radio on low, putting out the district channel's intermittent traffic. By 9, the valley below the tower had filled with the dark that comes before a storm, and the stars to the northeast were already obscured by the leading edge of the front. At 11:30, the radio produced something that was not traffic. It was not static exactly. Static has a texture, a broadband wash that her ear had learned to tune out. This was narrower, 2 words, or possibly 1 word spoken twice, or possibly a name, pushed through the signal as if from a significant distance, the way transmissions sound when they're bouncing off a layer of atmosphere rather than traveling direct. She caught the shape of it more than the content. She noted it in the log as possible interference, probable lightning-related propagation anomaly given the approaching front, and moved on. That was the rational explanation, and it was a good one. She had logged similar events during storm rotations before. At 1:15 a.m., the radio produced something else. This was not the same. This was clear, full signal strength, no distortion, the unmistakable quality of a transmission from someone close enough to be hitting the repeater properly. Channel 7, the emergency channel for lost or injured hikers. A voice, calm, not distressed, reporting a lost party at a trail junction, giving a trail code designation, requesting a wellness check. She cross-referenced the code in her current trail reference binder. Standard procedure. The binder was organized by district and then by trail designation, and she found the section and ran her finger down the column of codes. The code did not exist in current use. She went through it twice. She checked the adjacent pages in case she had misjudged the alphanumeric sequence. The code was not there. She pulled out the supplementary binder, the one that held retired designations, trails rerouted, closed, absorbed into new systems. Some districts kept these as reference for search and rescue scenarios involving old maps. She had the Tennessee district's retired list because her supervisor had given her a complete binder package at the start of the rotation. The code was in the retired list. It had been assigned to a trail section that was rerouted in 2012 after a flood event damaged approximately 2 miles of the original corridor. The trail no longer existed under that designation. The junction referenced in the transmission had been rerouted a 1/4 mile to the east and renumbered. Nobody who had hiked that trail in the last 11 years would know that code. It was not on any current map. It was not on any signage. It existed only in archived documentation that a hiker would have had no reason to access. She called district and reported the transmission, the channel, the time, the code, the fact that the code was retired. The duty officer acknowledged and said they'd look into it and get back to her. District did not get back to her that night. She sat with the radio in the windows and the approaching storm and ran the possibilities. Old equipment was the most logical. Someone operating a legacy radio set to a channel and using an old reference guide, possibly a very long-term local user who had learned the trail system before the reroute and never updated their materials. It was unusual, but not impossible. Rural areas kept old equipment running well past its expected service life, and the people who used them sometimes kept old habits. She was almost satisfied with this when she reached for the logbook to make her entry and found something in the margin of the current page. The logbook was a standard Forest Service issue, hardbound, with pre-printed entry fields for date, time, observer, weather conditions, and notes. Her entries were on the page in her own handwriting, neat and consistent, filling the fields from the top of the page down. In the margin, perpendicular to her entries, in pencil, in handwriting that was not hers, were 2 items. A date, 2 days from now, and below it, a name she did not recognize. Not her name. Someone else's name, written in a careful hand, with the precision of someone making a record. She looked at the page for a long time. She had been the only person in this tower since her arrival. The staircase rang audibly under any weight. She had confirmed this on her way up. And again, when she'd gone down once to check the exterior equipment box at the base of the structure. Nobody had come up those stairs without her knowing. The logbook had been in her sight or within arm's reach for the entire shift. The pencil writing was not old. She pressed her finger lightly against it, not smearing, but testing the surface. The graphite had the slight raised quality of fresh application, not the flat settled look of pencil that has been on paper for any significant time. It had been written tonight, in this tower, on this page, while she was in this tower. She closed the logbook and set it on the table and looked at all 4 windows in sequence, a slow circuit. The storm was close now. She could see the lightning in the southwest, still distant, the kind of silent flickering that looks decorative until the interval between flash and thunder gets short enough to matter. Visibility beyond the catwalk was perhaps 50 yards and dropping as the cloud base descended. She thought about the previous rotation ranger. Before the season started, he had said something to her that she had filed as professional superstition, the particular folklore that accumulates around isolated postings, the kind of thing experienced people say to new people partly as genuine transmission of local knowledge, and partly as the mild hazing of someone who hasn't yet earned their own stories. What he had said was, if you get a call you can't place, log it and don't go look. She had logged it. She picked up the handset to call district again, and the radio produced a third transmission. Same channel, same voice, same retired trail code, spoken once. And then, after a pause, a single short whistle. One short. In standard whistle protocol, the protocol every ranger and serious hiker learned, one short blast meant I am here. The transmission ended. The storm took the signal and the radio returned to static. She stood at the south window with her flashlight aimed at the fire road below the tower, 60 feet down, and she could not see the road through the weather. She could see the edge of the catwalk. She could see the top of the staircase. Beyond that, the dark and the rain that had just begun, and somewhere below it, the road she could not see. She stood with the flashlight on the place where the road should be and waited for the lightning to give her a second of visibility. One short blast. I am here. Whoever or whatever had transmitted that was telling her exactly where they were. She was standing at the window trying to see it, and she could not decide in that moment whether knowing the location of something was more or less frightening than not knowing. The lightning came in 2 pulses, maybe 3 seconds apart, the kind of close strike that lights the whole sky rather than a single channel. And in the first pulse, she saw the fire road below the tower in sharp white detail. The gravel surface, the drainage ditch along the left edge, the gate at the far end of the road where it met the main forest route. At the edge of the road, where the gravel met the tree line on the right side, there was a shape. Upright. Still. At the road's edge with the tree line immediately behind it, which meant it was both visible and not visible, present enough to register in the lightning flash, close enough to the trees that the second pulse showed her less than the first. The way something appears and then uses the returning dark to adjust. She did not move from the window. She set the flashlight down on the table behind her so that her own reflection was not competing with what was outside, and she picked up the binoculars from the equipment shelf. Standard issue, 8 power, adequate for daylight spotting and nearly useless in these conditions. She trained them on the area where the shape had been and waited for more lightning. It came. The shape was still there. In the binoculars, she could resolve it to approximately human height and width, upright, facing the tower, not moving. She could not determine clothing, features, or any detail that would tell her whether she was looking at a person or a post or a survey marker or a piece of equipment she had not noticed on her arrival. The resolution was not sufficient, and the light was not sufficient, and she was 60 feet up looking through rain and binoculars at something that might have been anything. She watched for 11 minutes. She logged the entry as she watched, writing with one hand and holding the binoculars with the other. Possible figure: Fire Road edge, stationary, 2:34 a.m., no motion, weather clearing. The shape did not move. She was nearly ready to classify it as a fixed object, a marker or a post she had simply failed to notice in the afternoon, when she lowered the binoculars to rub her eyes and raised them again. The shape was closer. Not dramatically closer, not halfway up the road. Perhaps 20 feet closer to the base of the tower than it had been, which meant it had moved during the second she had not been watching because she had not seen it move. It was simply in a different position than it had been, the way something appears when you're not looking at it continuously and it uses the gaps. She put the binoculars down and picked up the radio handset. She did not transmit on Channel 7. She went back to the district channel and called the duty officer and reported a possible person on the fire road, stationary, requesting guidance. The duty officer acknowledged and said he'd note it, and she should observe and report any movement. His voice had the steady, slightly flattened quality of someone managing multiple situations at 2:30 in the morning, and she did not think he understood what she was describing, and she did not know how to describe it more precisely without sounding like something other than a professional. She watched until 4 a.m. At some point before 4, she could not identify exactly when, the shape was no longer visible. The storm had continued to clear, and by 4 the visibility from the tower was back to several miles, and the fire road was visible its full length in the tower's exterior light, and there was nothing on it. At first light she climbed down. She had her flashlight and her radio, and she walked the road from the tower base to the gate and back. The gravel was wet and soft from the rain, which meant it was receptive, and approximately 2/3 of the way down the road from the tower, at the right edge where the gravel met the drainage ditch and the tree line, she found what she was looking for: a mud impression in the soft ground at the road's edge. Roughly, the dimensions of a human form standing. Not a footprint, not a track, but the compressed record of prolonged standing in one place, the way soft ground records weight that has been in contact with it for an extended period. The impression was deep enough to suggest significant time. It was at the position where the shape had been in the binoculars. On a flat, dry rock above the mudline, above the rain-wetted ground, on a surface that the rain had not reached because it sat at a slight angle under the overhang of a large root, there was a piece of paper, folded once. She picked it up. It was a trail register entry card. Standard Forest Service stock, the pre-printed fields across the top. The card was dated 2009. The trail code in the designation field was the retired code from the radio transmissions. The same designation, the same alphanumeric sequence. The name field held a hiker's name she did not recognize. The destination field listed the junction that no longer existed under that designation. And at the bottom of the card, below the standard fields, in handwriting that matched neither the careful pencil writing from the logbook nor the printed fields, was a note. Don't use the night channel after the storm, they listen. She stood on the fire road in the early morning with the card in her hand, and looked at the mud impression, and then looked at the road, and then looked at the trees. The card was dry. She had been watching this location through binoculars in rain for over an hour, and the rock it rested on was dry due to the root overhang, and the card was dry, which meant it had been placed there during the rain by something that knew where the dry surface was, or it had been placed there before the rain began, which would have been before she arrived at the tower. She could not determine which of these was more or less possible. She did not include the card in her official incident report. What she wrote in the report was that she had observed possible radio interference consistent with lightning-related propagation anomaly, had noted an indeterminate object on the fire road that resolved to a natural feature and improved visibility, and had found no evidence of human presence in the restricted area. The column for resolved she left blank because she did not know what to write in it. She gave her incident report to district that morning and requested a transfer at the end of the rotation. The transfer was approved without difficulty. She had a good record and no history of early termination requests, and the district supervisor, when processing the paperwork, did not ask her for a specific reason, which she found notable in its own right. She had expected at least a question. The penciled logbook entry, the date 2 days out, the name she didn't recognize. She copied into a personal notebook before handing the logbook back to district. When she was home, she looked up the name. It took her 3 separate searches over 2 days. The name matched a missing hiker reported on that trail in 2011, listed in a county incident report she found through a state database. The hiker had been reported overdue, a search had been conducted over 4 days, and the case had been closed without recovery. She read the incident report twice and then closed the database and did not search further. She keeps the trail register card in the binder with her old rotation logs. The logbook itself is in a district archive somewhere. She does not know if anyone else has read the penciled entry, or whether district ever followed up on the transmission, or whether the duty officer from that night even retained his note about the possible figure on the fire road. These are things that exist in official channels that she no longer has access to, and she has found that she does not want access to them. She works day shifts now. A district office, inside work, the kind of position where the radio is a desk unit and the windows look out at a parking lot. She is good at it. Her colleagues describe her as thorough and reliable. When the subject of fire tower rotations comes up, as it occasionally does in a district office, she participates in the conversation in a normal way, which is to say she answers questions about logistics and equipment and protocol, and does not discuss the September rotation in Tennessee. She does not use Channel 7 under any circumstances, including drills. When her supervisor asked her about this once, not accusatorially, just noticing, she said the channel had given her trouble in the Tennessee posting, and she preferred to stay off it. Her supervisor nodded and moved on. The card she found on the fire road says, "Don't use the night channel after the storm. They listen." She does not know who wrote it. She does not know who placed it on that rock, or whether the person who placed it was the same person who stood in the road for over an hour in the rain. She does not know what they were listening for, or whether they found it, or whether the precaution she now maintains on Channel 7 is meaningful in any practical sense. She maintains it anyway. Some warnings make more sense after the fact than they did before. That one she would rather not test. Every account so far involved someone who stayed in one place long enough for something to find them. The next account is about a man who kept moving and could not find a way out. He had been running the blog for 3 years by the time he drove into eastern Kentucky, long enough to have developed a specific aesthetic for it. Forgotten roads, unmaintained county routes, the kind of infrastructure that exists in the gap between what's on a digital map and what's actually out there if you drive slowly enough and pay attention. He called it documentation, which it was, but it was also the particular pleasure of a person who finds abandoned things more interesting than functioning ones. He had readers. Not many, but consistent ones. The kind who left comments about specific roads they recognized or roads they wanted him to find. The Kentucky route came from a paper map he bought at a truck stop outside of Paintsville, one of the old county highway maps that local governments used to print and gas stations used to carry. The kind that shows every named road, including the ones that have reverted to gravel or grass since the survey date. He had a collection of them. He preferred them to GPS for this kind of work because GPS showed him what was currently maintained, and he was interested in what wasn't. The road he found on the map was identified only by a route number, no name, running south from a county road into a hollow and terminating at what the map showed as a small impoundment, a pond, or a retention feature. The symbol was ambiguous. About 9 miles according to the map's scale. He had driven similar roads 100 times. He loaded his dashboard camera, filled the tank at a station on the county road, and turned south into the hollow just after noon on a clear October afternoon. The hollow was steep-walled and close, the kind of geography that made you understand why people in this part of Kentucky talked about hollows as places rather than features. Not just a low area between ridges, but a distinct location with its own light and sound and air. The road was one-lane gravel in reasonable condition, following a creek on the left side, the wall of the hollow rising sharply on the right. Hardwoods in full color, the kind of afternoon that justifies every decision that led you to it. He was filming from the dashboard camera and occasionally from his phone when he spotted something worth pausing for. A collapsed barn visible through the trees, a concrete bridge with its date cast into the parapet, a hand-painted sign on a fence post that he slowed to read. At approximately the half-mile point, he passed a rusted gate on the left side of the road, set back slightly from the shoulder, with a hand-painted sign wired to the top rail. He photographed it through the windshield without stopping and drove on. At the 2-mile point, he passed a gray truck parked in a gravel turnout on the right side of the road. The driver was inside, sitting upright, watching him pass. He noted it the way you note any parked vehicle on a remote road. Registered it, assessed it as non-threatening, filed it. Someone waiting for a hunting partner, probably, or a local who used the turnout as a rest point. The truck was an older model, mid-90s, gray primer over what might have been red underneath, and the driver was a man of indeterminate age who tracked him with his eyes without moving his head as the car went past. Nothing unusual, he kept driving. The road continued. The creek stayed on his left, the hollow wall on his right. He passed the collapsed barn, the concrete bridge, the stand of sycamores at the drainage confluence. The road was good, and the light was good, and he was enjoying the drive. 19 minutes after passing the gray truck, he came around a right-hand curve, and his headlights, he had turned them on as the hollow deepened and the light dropped, caught a gravel turnout on the left side of the road. The gray truck was parked in it. Same truck. Same primer gray color, same patching on the right rear quarter panel. Same slight forward lean from a soft front tire on the driver's side. The driver was in the same position, upright, watching the road. He slowed as he passed, and the driver tracked him again. The same eyes without head movement attention as before. He drove past and kept his speed even and did not stop. He had been driving continuously for 19 minutes in one direction on a one-lane road with no intersections and no room to pass. The gray truck could not have passed him. There had been no intersecting road. He was certain of this because the dashboard camera was running, and he had been watching the road with the specific attention of someone documenting it. There was no place the truck could have gone and come back from. There was no route by which it could have reached the second turnout ahead of him without him having seen it. He pulled up the map on his phone. No signal, which was expected. He unfolded the paper map on the passenger seat and studied the road's route. One line, south, no branches, terminating at the impoundment symbol 9 miles from the county road. According to the map, he was at approximately the 3-mile mark. He kept driving. The creek, the hollow wall, the color of the leaves against the gray sky where the road bent south. He noted the barn again as he passed it and then realized, The barn was on his right. When he had passed it the first time, it had been on his left. The creek, which had been on his left, was now on his right. He slowed to a stop in the middle of the road and sat with the engine idling. He had not turned around. He was certain he had not turned around. The road had not produced an opportunity to turn around. One lane, no shoulder, hollow wall on one side, and a 6-inch drop to the creek bed on the other. But the barn was on the wrong side, and the creek was on the wrong side, and the sycamores at the confluence were on his left where they should have been on his right. He checked the odometer. 9.2 miles from the start of the road. The map said the road ended in 9 miles. He was past the end of the road. The road was still going. He thought about this for a moment in the way you think about something that has not yet fully arrived at meaning, turning it in his hands, looking at each side of it. Then he remembered the hand-painted sign on the gate at the half-mile point, the one he had photographed without stopping to read. He pulled up the photo on his cracked phone screen and zoomed in. The sign read, "This road, don't loop. If you think it, did you went too far." He sat in the middle of the road with the engine idling and read that sentence twice. Then he read it a third time. Someone had made a sign. Someone had stood at that gate with paint and a brush and a board and had written that sentence because they had needed to write it, because they had been where he was now, or had known someone who had been there, and they had considered that information worth preserving in a form that would survive the weather. The cell signal was gone. The road was too narrow to turn around on. The light in the hollow was dropping with the early evening speed of an enclosed space. Behind him was 9 miles of one-lane road that had already demonstrated it did not behave according to ordinary geometry. And ahead of him was more of the same road, still going south, past a terminus that no longer seemed to exist. He put the truck in gear and kept driving, because forward still seemed more likely to produce an exit than backward, and because the alternative was sitting in the middle of a road that looped without looping until something else happened. 3 miles further, he reached a turnout on the right side of the road. Empty gravel, nothing in it. He pulled his own tires into it to check the map again, and his headlights caught the surface of the turnout as he pulled in. His own tire tracks were already there. The same tread pattern, the same turning radius, the same line of approach from the road. He had been in this turnout before. He sat in the turnout with his headlights on his own tracks and kept the engine running because turning the engine off felt like a decision he was not ready to make. He had been driving a road he had already driven. He did not know when the loop had begun. He did not know if the man in the gray truck was ahead of him or behind him. He did not know how long the road intended to keep going, or whether the exit he was driving toward was the same exit he had already passed, or whether the sign on the gate was a warning or a description or both. He kept driving. He drove for another mile past the turnout with his own tracks in it, watching the road in the headlights with the specific attention of someone who has stopped trusting what they see, but has no alternative to looking. The creek was on his right. The hollow wall was on his left. He noted both and noted that they had been in these positions for this portion of the drive, which meant either he was on a different section of road than he thought, or the road had righted itself somehow in its own logic, and neither of those options gave him anything to work with. He made a decision. Not a confident one, there was no confidence available, but a practical one. The kind you make when the options have narrowed to 2 and neither is good. He was going to reverse. He was going to back down this road, slowly and carefully, using the camera mirror and the backup sensors his car had, and he was going to track the odometer and stop at every turnout and confirm whether his tracks were in it before he committed to it as a landmark. Systematic. The way you approach a problem when the problem has stopped making sense and you need the process to carry you. He put the car in reverse and started back. The first turnout he reached was empty. No tracks, clean gravel, which was either reassuring or meant nothing given how little the road's geography had proven trustworthy. He noted it and kept reversing. The creek shifted back to his left as he backed, which matched his original experience of the road and suggested he was moving in the right direction, or at least in a consistent direction. 1.2 miles back from the turnout with his tracks, the gray truck was in the road, facing him. Headlights on, full beam centered in the lane, not pulled to the side, not in a turnout. In the road, with perhaps 30 feet between his front bumper and its front bumper, both sets of headlights on. The hollow wall on his right and the creek drop on his left, and no room to go around. He stopped. He sat in the car with his foot on the brake and looked at the truck through 30 feet of headlight glare, and the truck did not move. The driver was visible as a shape behind the wheel, upright. The same posture as both previous sightings. Not aggressive, not gesturing. Simply present in the road at a point he would have to pass to get out. He did not get out of his car. He did not honk. He put his hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 and sat there and breathed carefully and thought about what he knew, which was not much. He knew the road was one lane. He knew there was nowhere to go around the truck. He knew that backing further would take him deeper into the section of road he had already been through twice, and that going forward would require the truck to move first. He waited, 4 minutes by his phone clock, though it felt longer. Then the gray truck moved. Not forward, it reversed slowly, the backup lights coming on red in the rain that had started sometime in the last 10 minutes without him fully registering it. The truck reversed and pulled into a turnout on the right side of the road, a turnout he had not noticed before, partially screened by a rhododendron stand, and it sat there with its lights on and left the road clear. He drove past without stopping. He did not look directly at the driver. He kept his speed even and his hands on the wheel and watched the road ahead, and in his peripheral vision he could see the truck sitting in the turnout as he passed, the driver's shape in the window, watching. He drove the remaining distance without stopping. The road ended at the county blacktop exactly where it should have, at the junction he had turned from, how many hours ago now? 2.5, with a stop sign and a reflective post, and the gravel giving way to asphalt in the abrupt way of county road junctions in eastern Kentucky. He turned onto the blacktop and drove for a quarter mile before he pulled to the shoulder and stopped and sat with the engine running and his hands in his lap. He checked the odometer. Total time on the road, 2 hours and 14 minutes. The road, driven in reverse over its final section, had taken 11 minutes to produce the junction exit. He could not account for the other 2 hours and 3 minutes. He drove to the nearest town with the signal and sat in a gas station parking lot and ate the gas station sandwich he bought without tasting it and looked at the dashboard camera unit on the windshield. The camera had been running the entire time, motion activated and continuous, logging to an SD card. He was a blogger. Documentation was the point. He had the record. He remembered then the sign on the gate. He still had the photograph on his phone. He pulled it up and looked at it again more carefully than he had before, at the sign itself, the painted letters, the board it was painted on, and below the text he had read in the turnout, in smaller letters that he had cropped out of his initial zoom, painted in a different color as if added later by a different hand. Turn around before the light goes. Come back in daylight if you have to come back. He had not come back in daylight. He had been on the road when the light went. That evening, he opened his laptop and started a draft for the blog. He got as far as a title and a date, and then sat looking at the blank space below the date for a long time. He typed one sentence. Found a road today that I can't write about yet. He published it because leaving a draft unfinished bothered him more than publishing something incomplete. He told himself he would come back to it when he had processed the drive. He did not come back to it. A reader messaged him within a few days, someone who had been following the blog for 2 years and knew his documentation style well enough to know that "can't write about yet" was not his register. The reader asked what road it was and what county. He wrote back once, "Don't look for it." The reader asked why. He did not respond to that message. Several weeks later, another reader asked about the Kentucky entry in the comments section, wondering if he'd had a chance to write it up yet. He deleted the comment. He did not post again after that. The blog stayed online, the last entry still there with its one sentence, the date in the upper left corner of the post, the comment section below it empty where the deleted comment had been. He told one person the full account, the reader who had messaged him directly, in a private exchange that lasted 3 messages. In the third message, the reader asked if he still had the camera footage. He said he did. The reader asked if he would post it. He said the footage was not something he wanted to put online. The reader asked if he would at least describe what was on it. He said the truck appeared in the second turnout with no footage of it passing him in either direction. It was simply there in one frame and absent in the preceding frames from the same camera angle, with no gap in the recording and no explanation for the discontinuity. The reader did not respond to that message. He drives paved roads now exclusively. He kept the paper map collection, but he no longer uses it to find routes. The maps sit in a box in his closet. He told the one person he spoke to about the drive that the thing that bothered him most was not the truck, which he could construct possible explanations for, however inadequate, and not the tire tracks in the turnout, which were harder but still theoretically within the range of explanation. It was the 11 minutes. The drive in reverse, which covered the same road at the same speed, produced the junction in 11 minutes. He had been on the road for 2 hours and 14 minutes in total. Something accounted for the remaining time. He does not know what. He has not been able to construct an explanation that fits all 3 data points simultaneously: the elapsed time, the camera footage, the geometry of the road, and he has stopped trying. The blog is still online. He has not taken it down, and he has not added anything to it. The last entry is dated October the 14th. The one sentence is still there. Below it, the comment section is empty. He thought about what happened on that road every day for the first 6 months, then less, then only sometimes, and usually at night, and usually when he was on a road he didn't know well, and the light was starting to go and he had not yet confirmed where the road came out. Every account so far had been about a stranger arriving somewhere. The next one is about a woman who thought she knew exactly where she was. She had been to this place 4 times. She knew the owner. She knew every room. She thought she knew every room. She had found the cabin the way people find places they return to, by accident the first time, deliberately every time after. A friend had recommended it 4 years earlier, one of those offhand recommendations that turns into something you claim as your own. A rental property in the Virginia Highlands, a hollow property with a creek access and a covered porch and cell service bad enough to feel intentional. She had stayed there 4 times across 4 years, always alone, always in autumn or early winter when the rates were lowest and the hollow was quietest. She knew which porch board to step over. She knew the wood stove needed the damper opened 2/3 before it would draw properly. She knew the guest book on the kitchen table, had read it through on every visit and added her own entry each time in the same spot, the last page with writing on it, building a small record of her returns. She was a writer, not successfully enough to quit her other work, but consistently enough that she had a process, and the process required solitude, and the cabin had become, over 4 years, the place where solitude was possible. She was there in November to finish something she had been working on for 8 months, with a week of no obligations and a manuscript that needed one more real push to become what it was supposed to be. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon and noticed the porch light was on. Not unusual exactly. Rental owners sometimes left lights on for arriving guests, particularly in properties accessed by hollow roads where the last stretch of driving happened in the dark. But it was 3 in the afternoon. She noted it without stopping on it and carried her bag up the porch steps and found the key on the hook inside the lockbox where the owner always left it. The cabin was cold. It had been closed since September. The owner had told her when she booked, and November hollows hold the cold in a specific way, the air damp and still and slightly stale from months of closure. She opened the wood stove and got a fire going before she unpacked, the way the cabin required, and while the stove began to warm the main room, she went through the space with the practical efficiency of someone who had done this before. Checked the water pressure, confirmed the propane tank was full, tested the porch light switch, found it was on, turned it off, then turned it back on because the hollow was already going dark by 3:30 in November, and she wanted the light. The guest book was on the kitchen table. It was always on the kitchen table. She sat down with it while the stove worked and opened it to the last entry, hers, from October of the previous year, the familiar handwriting of her own travel version of herself. A short paragraph about the creek level and the manuscript she had finished that week and the particular quality of the light in the hollow in the last days of October. She had signed it with the shortened version of her middle name, the one she used here. Not her professional name, not her legal name. The name she wrote in guest books and signed on postcards and used in low-stakes personal contexts where she did not need to be her full self. She had used it in this guest book 4 times, once per visit, a small private consistency. Below her October entry, in a hand that was not hers, was a response. She read it twice before the meaning fully arrived. It was addressed to her, not to the next guest or whoever stays here next. To her, by the name she used in the guest book, the shortened middle name, the one not on the booking, not on her ID, not connected to her in any searchable way. The entry said, "We saw your light. We thought you might come back. The back room is not for guests." Below that, a symbol, not a signature, not initials, not a name. A symbol, like a surveyor's mark or a land notation. 2 lines crossing at an angle with a short perpendicular through the crossing point. She sat with the guest book open on the kitchen table and the stove beginning to tick with heat and read the entry a 3rd time. She called the owner. He answered on the 3rd ring, and she described what she was reading, keeping her voice level, which required some effort. He told her he hadn't been to the property since August. The cleaning service had been there in September. A 2-person operation run by a couple from the next county over, people he had used for 3 years without any issues. He did not know what she was describing. He sounded concerned in the way that property owners sound concerned when a guest reports something they cannot immediately explain. Focused, slightly guarded, processing liability. She asked about the back room. He said it was a standard room, used as an office or a reading room by most guests, nothing unusual about it. She told him it was locked. He paused. He said it shouldn't be. There was no lock on that door. It latched, but there was no key lock, just a standard interior lever handle. She described the lever handle and he confirmed that was the one. She said it was not moving when she tried it. He said sometimes the door swelled in the frame with humidity changes. He said she could try lifting the handle while turning it. She tried it while he was on the phone. The door did not open. The handle turned, but the door did not move, as if something on the other side was holding it rather than any mechanical failure of the latch. She told him this. He was quiet for a moment and then said he would try to get someone up there in the next day or two, and in the meantime she should just use the main bedroom as she normally would and not worry about it. And he was sorry for the inconvenience. She thanked him and ended the call. She ate dinner at the kitchen table with the guest book open in front of her, reading it from the beginning the way she had never bothered to do before. She was a last entry reader normally, the way most people used guest books, catching up from where she'd left off rather than starting over. Starting from the beginning took her through 3 years of entries before her own, and she was looking for the symbol, and she found it. 3 pages before her first entry, a couple from Richmond had signed and dated their stay, described a long hike up to the ridge, mentioned the good weather and the creek. And below their entry, in the same hand she had seen below hers, addressed to them by the names they had used in signing, their first names, informal, the way you sign a guest book when you are relaxed and not thinking about it, was a response, shorter than hers. Observational, the same symbol below it. She went through the rest of the book. 18 entries in total had been answered. Not all of them. Selective. The pattern was not immediately clear. Not every couple, not every solo guest. Some entries had responses, some did not. The ones that did were addressed with the same specificity, the personal detail, the name or the pet name, or the self-description the guest had used. Each response was brief and neighborly in its phrasing, the way a note left by a reasonable person might read. None of the responses were threatening. They were observational. They noticed things. They referred to the light in the windows, the smoke from the chimney, the sound of typing if the guest had mentioned working, the times of arrival and departure. They were the record of sustained attention from something that had been paying attention for a long time. She closed the guest book and thought about the porch light she had found on at 3 in the afternoon. She tried the window of the back room from outside, taking her flashlight around the cabin's perimeter in the dark. The window was locked from the inside. She put the flashlight against the glass and looked in. The room was undisturbed in the way a room is when it has not been used. A thin layer of settled dust visible on the desk surface, a chair angled slightly toward the window, a small bookshelf against the far wall. On the desk, her notebook was open. She had left the notebook in her bag. She was certain of this because she remembered taking her bag off her shoulder in the main room and setting it against the wall by the door without opening it, and then going to the stove and then calling the owner. The notebook was a standard composition book, black cover, her handwriting visible on the open pages, her notes from the manuscript, the same notes she had been making for 8 months. Below her handwriting, visible through the glass from outside in the flashlight beam, was more text. The same hand as the guest book responses. She could see it was there, but could not read it from outside the glass. She stood at the window with the flashlight in the dark hollow behind her, and looked at her own notebook on the desk of a room she had not entered, containing writing she had not written. The porch light was on behind her, throwing its yellow circle to the porch railing and stopping. The tree line was invisible beyond it. The creek was audible from somewhere below the property, moving in the dark. Then the porch light went out. She stood in complete dark with the flashlight in the window glass, and from the other side of that glass, from inside the locked room, a voice said something she could not make out through the wall. 1 sentence, maybe less. Low, without urgency. The way someone talks when they are not trying to be heard through glass but are not trying not to be heard either. She stood still and did not move. Then the porch light came back on. She did not go to the back room door. She stood outside at the window for a moment longer, flashlight still pressed against the glass, and then she walked back around the cabin to the porch and went inside and locked the front door behind her, which she had not done before because she had not thought she needed to. She thought she needed to now. The main room felt different with the front door locked, which was irrational, and she knew it was irrational, and it did not help. She turned on every light she could reach, the overhead, the table lamp, the kitchen light, the bathroom light through the open door. And she sat in the chair closest to the front door and looked at the back room door and thought about what she was going to do. What she was going to do was stay. This was not bravery. It was a practical calculation. The hollow road was dark, and she had been driving for 5 hours, and the nearest town with a motel was 40 minutes away, and she had work to do. And this place, whatever else it had become in the last 2 hours, was still the place she had come to work. She was not going to let a locked door and a voice she hadn't clearly heard send her back down a hollow road in the dark. That was the calculation she made, and she made it deliberately, and she was aware that it was also the calculation people made in stories right before the situation got worse. The situation got worse. Not immediately. For a while, the cabin was simply quiet in the way cabins are quiet. The stove working, the creak audible through the front wall, the porch light doing its job at the railing and no further. She heated soup on the small stove and ate at the table without opening the guest book again, and then moved to the couch with her laptop and worked on the manuscript, which sounds braver than it was. The work was familiar, and the familiarity was a rope she held onto. At some point past midnight, she realized she had not heard anything from the back room for hours, and the noticing of this was itself unsettling because it meant she had been tracking the silence as a condition rather than simply experiencing it as quiet. Then, at approximately 2 a.m, the back room produced a sound. Not a knock, not a voice. The window, which she had confirmed was closed and locked from inside when she looked through the glass from outside, made a slow movement. A slight gust-like sound that was not a gust because there was no wind that could reach an interior window, and then settled. She looked at the back room door. From the gap at the bottom, she could see the quality of the dark inside had changed slightly, the way it changes when a window moves and the air shifts. She took her phone and angled it toward the door gap and turned the flashlight on and took a photograph of what she could see under the door without approaching. She reviewed the photo. Floor of the back room, the near edge of the desk leg, the settled dust in the ambient flashlight beam, and near the base of the door, facing it, the impression in the dust of something that had recently been there and was no longer. She put the phone on the table face down and did not look at the photo again that night. She sat with every light on until the windows went from black to gray to the pale, early light that meant another hour until full sunrise, and then she called the owner again. He arrived by 10 a.m, a 2-hour drive from his home in the next county, and she was grateful for this because it meant he understood the call was serious. He looked at the back room door and tried the handle himself and confirmed it did not open. He did not have a key because, as he had told her, there was no key. He went to his truck and came back with a hammer and a flat pry bar and spent about 10 minutes working the hinge pins out of the door, which was the most practical solution when the latch side could not be accessed. The door came free from the frame and he set it against the wall. The room was undisturbed. Desk, chair, bookshelf, dust. The chair was angled toward the window, the same position she had seen from outside the glass. The window was closed. She walked to the desk and looked at her notebook. The composition book was open to the page she had last written on, and below her notes, her handwriting ending mid-page the way it does when you stop in the middle of a session, was a continuation in the other hand. She read it, standing at the desk. "You write well. The ridge on the east side has a better view. You should use the east window. We have watched you work. You are welcome to come back. Do not bring others." The symbol below it. The same symbol from the guest book responses. 2 lines crossing at an angle with a short perpendicular through the crossing point. She showed it to the owner. He read it, and then looked at the window, and then looked at the door frame where he had just removed the door, and did not say anything for a moment. There was no way into this room. The window was locked from the inside. The hinge pins had been in the hinges. She had watched him remove them. The latch was an interior lever with no exterior keyhole. Whatever had been in this room had not entered from outside and had not left through any opening she could account for. He apologized again. He offered a complete refund and 2 free nights on a future stay, which she did not accept. She asked him when the back room had last been used by a guest, and he said it was always available, always had been. She asked if anyone had ever reported anything unusual about it. He said no, then corrected himself. He said one guest, a couple from the Richmond area, had mentioned in a checkout email that the back room had given them an uncomfortable feeling, but they had attributed it to the room being smaller than the listing suggested, and he had thought nothing of it. She photographed the notebook entry. She looked at the guest book one more time before she left, reading through the responded entries again with the symbol in mind, the land notation quality of it, the surveyor's look of the 2 crossing lines. She took the notebook with her. She left the guest book. She called a researcher she had been connected to through a historical preservation group 2 months later, when she had enough distance from the event to describe it coherently. The researcher worked with the County Historical Society in that part of Virginia and had particular expertise in pre-county land documentation. She described the symbol and sent photographs of it, from the guest book entries and from the notebook continuation. The researcher took 3 days to respond, which was longer than usual. When he responded, he said the symbol appeared in county land records from 1887. It was a property marker used by a specific family, a common practice for rural landholders before standardized survey notation, a personal mark used to identify land they claimed or worked. The family name was recorded in the documents. He had found the symbol in 3 separate property filings associated with that family, all in the same hollow. The last recorded member of the family, according to county death records, had died in 1941. She asked him if the cabin property had ever been associated with that family. He said he would look into it and let her know. He did not follow up on that question. She sent 2 messages asking about it. He responded to the second one briefly, saying the records were incomplete for that period, and he had not been able to make a definitive connection. And then he did not respond to further contact. She checked the cabin listing 6 months after her stay. It was still online. The photographs included the main room, the kitchen, the bedroom, and one image labeled Private Study that showed the back room, the desk, the chair, the east window with light coming through it. The listing had 17 recent reviews, mostly 4 and 5 stars. One review, posted 3 weeks after her stay, said the property had a warm and neighborly feeling, like someone's been expecting you. She has not returned to the cabin. When she works on manuscripts now, she uses a room in her own house with the door open and 2 windows she can see from her desk. She bought the composition notebook back from the cabin with her. She has not opened it since she left. The researcher called her once, about 4 months after his last email. He asked if she had taken the guest book with her when she left. She said no. He said he had contacted the owner to request it for the Historical Society's archive, and the owner had gone to retrieve it and found it was not in the cabin. The owner said it had been on the table when he left after removing the door. That was the same day she left. Nobody had been to the property between that day and the researcher's request. The guest book was gone. The researcher asked if she had any idea where it might be. She said she did not. She did not tell him that the idea of the guest book being gone was, in a way that she could not fully articulate, less frightening than the idea of it still being there, still on the table. still open to the last page with writing on it, still waiting for the next guest to arrive and sit down and begin to read. At least, with the guest book gone, no one would know what they were arriving into. Or, so she told herself. The final account is different from everything that came before it. Every other account in this collection involved someone who was, in the end, a stranger to the location. A visitor, a renter, a professional passing through. The man who told the final account had been going to the same ridge for 22 years. He knew every trail, every creek crossing, every place the fog settled first. He thought he knew what the mountain held. He was wrong about one thing. One specific thing that changed what the mountain knew about him and what it was willing to use. The truck driver wrote it down that same night, sitting in the parking lot of the diner with the engine running and his notebook open on the steering wheel. He said later that he wrote it immediately because the man who told it had the look of someone delivering information rather than telling a story. No performance in it, no pause for effect, just the steady forward movement of someone who needed the account to exist somewhere outside of themselves. The man at the diner, the one doing the talking, had come in at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, still in his hunting clothes, the kind of orange and brown layering that serious hunters wear in November in Virginia. Wool base, canvas over it, boots that had been wet and dried several times. He sat in the booth across from the truck driver, who was on his second coffee in his third hour of waiting for a road closure to clear on the highway south, and he ordered a coffee and looked at it, and then looked up and said, without introduction, "I need to tell somebody what happened up on Craddock Ridge before I talk myself out of believing it." The truck driver was not a man who turned away from that kind of opening. He got out his notebook. The man, call him what the truck driver called him, which was nothing because he never gave his name, had been hunting Craddock Ridge every November for 22 years. He had started going up with his father when he was in his mid-30s, and had kept going after his father stopped being able to make the climb, and had kept going after his father died, and had kept going through a marriage, and through the years his children were young, and through the years they grew up and moved away, and had kept going for the 18 months since his wife died. The ridge was the one place, he told the truck driver, where he still felt like the same person he had always been. Not a widower, not a man whose house was too quiet. Just himself in the woods, doing something he had always done. He was a serious hunter, not a recreational dabbler, a man who knew the ridge the way people know places they have returned to for decades. The kind of knowledge that is partly topographical and partly something else. The accumulated sense of how a specific piece of land behaves across seasons and years and weather systems. He knew where the fog settled first in the morning and where it cleared last. He knew which creek crossing was safe after rain and which one wasn't. He knew the sound the ridge made at night when the temperature dropped and the trees contracted, and he knew the difference between that sound and other sounds. He was on his third night of a 6-day camp when it started. The camp was a canvas wall tent staked on a flat section of the ridge about 200 yards below the eastern summit, sheltered from the prevailing wind by a rock outcropping to the northwest. He had used this same spot for 11 years. Wood stove inside, a small one, the kind that takes split hardwood and produces enough heat to sleep comfortably in November. A lantern on the hook above the cot, his rifle on the rack he built from 2 branches and a length of cord the first time he camped here and had reassembled every year since. The third day had been a slow hunt. He had been out before light and back by noon, seen nothing worth pursuing, spent the afternoon splitting more wood than he needed, and organizing his camp with the methodical attention of someone who is comfortable alone and knows how to fill time. He ate at dusk, cleaned the rifle, sat outside on the folding stool until the cold made sitting outside impractical, then went into the tent and lowered the lantern and read until 9. He was not asleep at 9. He rarely slept before 10 on the ridge. The body took a day or two to adjust to the earlier rhythms of a camp without electricity, and on the third night he was usually just arriving at the point where sleep came easily. He was reading with the lantern at its lowest useful level when the sound came from the east slope. High, drawn out, the kind of sound that arrives at the edge of categorization and sits there. He registered it first as a coyote. The mountain had coyotes, had always had them, and they produced sounds at night that ranged from the expected to the genuinely unsettling, including vocalizations that a person under stress might hear as something else. He had heard coyotes that sounded like crying children, like arguing adults, like a dog in distress. He was not easily fooled by coyote sounds. He set his book down and listened. The sound did not repeat. He sat for a few minutes and then picked the book back up and told himself, "Coyote, eastern slope, moving away, nothing relevant." 2 hours later, at 11 by his watch, the sound came again. He was between sleep and waking when it arrived, which meant his processing of it was slower and less defended. He came fully awake in the way you come fully awake when something has reached you before your conscious attention had a chance to evaluate it. He lay on the cot and stared at the tent ceiling and listened to the sound resolve itself in his mind. 2 syllables. He had heard 2 syllables in the sound, in the frequency range of a human voice, coming from the north, from the direction of the creek bed. And the 2 syllables were, without serious ambiguity, his wife's name. The shortened version, the private version. The name that was not on any document and not known to anyone outside of their household. The name he had called her for 31 years. That her family had never used because they had a different name for her. That their children had never used because that was their parents' name for each other. That existed in no form in any space beyond the 2 of them, and now beyond him alone. He sat up slowly and put his feet on the ground and sat on the edge of the cot with his hands on his knees. The creek bed was to the north of the camp, maybe 60 yards. The sound had come from the north. He remembered the man at the gas station in town. Then, not a conversation he had sought, just an exchange that happened while he was filling the tank on Monday morning. The man behind the register coming out to check something on the pump display and pausing beside him. The man had asked if he was hunting Craddock this year. He had said yes. The man had asked if he was going alone. He had said yes. And the man had said, in the tone of someone repeating something they have said before and will say again because they have found it necessary, "Don't answer anything that comes from the creekside after dark. Doesn't matter what it sounds like." He had thanked the man and driven up the mountain and not thought about it again until this moment. He did not answer the sound. Not because he had remembered the warning. The warning came back to him a few seconds after the decision not to answer, not before it. He didn't answer because the cadence was wrong. 31 years of hearing his wife say her own name in various contexts, calling herself by it sometimes in the third person, the way long-partnered people occasionally do, as a form of self-reference or mild self-mockery, had given him a precise internal model of how those 2 syllables sounded in her voice. And this was not it. The sound had the phonetic shape of her name and something close to her pitch, but the weight of the syllables was wrong. The first syllable was too long, the second was too short. The timing between them was slightly off in a way he could not have measured but could absolutely perceive. The way a musician hears a note that is almost in tune and knows immediately that it is not. Whatever was at the creek bed had the sound, but not the knowledge of how she actually said it. He sat on the edge of the cot and held that thought and felt something settle in him that was not comfort. Nothing about the situation was comfortable, but was a kind of cold clarity. He knew what he was dealing with in the sense that he knew what it was trying to do. He did not know what it was. He reached for the rifle and laid it across his knees and sat in the dark tent with the lantern turned all the way down, and he listened to the creak and the wind and the November sounds of the ridge and did not speak. From outside the tent, on the east slope above camp, a footstep landed on the leaf cover. Then another, slow, measured, moving downhill toward the tent, one careful step at a time, in the unhurried way of something that was not trying to arrive quickly because it already knew where it was going. He counted the footsteps the way he had counted everything else that night. Not as a decision, but as something his mind did automatically, keeping its own record, because keeping records was the only form of control available to him. The steps came down the east slope at intervals of maybe 4 or 5 seconds, irregular enough to be organic, regular enough to be deliberate. He reached 32 before they leveled out onto the flat ground of the ridge shelf where his camp was situated. Then they stopped. He sat on the cot with the rifle across his knees and the lantern off, and the tent around him producing its own small sounds, the stove ticking as the wood burned down, the canvas shifting once in a light wind off the summit. And he listened to the silence where the footsteps had been and tried to place the position. East of camp, maybe 20 yards. In the area between the rock outcropping and the tent's east wall, where the leaf cover was deepest and the ground was softest. Nothing moved. He heard the creek to the north, constant and low. He heard the wind in the upper canopy, intermittent. He heard nothing from 20 yards east. Then the tent wall on the north side, the side facing the creek, pressed inward. Not at the top, not the whole surface. A single point of pressure, chest high on a standing person or slightly lower, steady and held, the nylon pushing inward in a smooth curve as if a hand were placed flat against the outside of the tent and leaning. He watched the wall press in, and he did not move. His hands were on the rifle, not raised, just present, fingers resting on the stock and the forearm with the particular stillness of someone who has carried a firearm in the woods for decades and knows the difference between holding a weapon and holding it correctly. The pressure held for a count of 5. Then it released and the wall went slack. A pause. Long enough that he had begun to recalibrate. Long enough that the rational part of his mind had started constructing the explanation about the wind, about the canvas, about how a specific type of pressure differential could produce localized inward deflection on a tent wall. And then the footsteps resumed. From the north side now, not the east. From the direction of the creek, closer than before. They were circling. He tracked the sound moving from the north around to the west side of the tent, then south, then east, back to the point where they had started. One full circuit of the camp perimeter. The steps were slower now, more deliberate, the kind of slow that is not hesitation but consideration. He kept the rifle across his knees. He did not move from the center of the cot. He was aware that the tent was orange, a fact he had never previously found relevant, that the tent was a highly visible color, and that with the stove still producing a faint glow through the vent at the top, the tent was essentially a lit lantern in the dark of the ridge. Whatever was circling could see exactly where he was. He could not see anything. The second circuit began. Same direction, same pace. He was counting steps now with less precision, tracking rhythm instead of number, and the rhythm was consistent in a way that animal movement was not. He had spent enough time in the woods to know how animals moved around a campsite, the stop and start of scent investigation, the randomness of curiosity, the abrupt changes of direction that reflected a mind processing multiple stimuli. This was not that. This was a single continuous line of travel around a fixed perimeter, as if the perimeter itself were the point. On what should have been the beginning of a third circuit, the footsteps stopped at the south side of the tent. The door side. He heard nothing for 30 seconds. Then, from directly outside the door, the voice came again. His wife's name, the private version, in the almost right pitch with the wrong weight on the syllables. And after it, new, something that had not been in the earlier calls, a second sound. Below the voice, in a register that he felt more than heard, like a question asked in a frequency that bypassed the ear and arrived somewhere else. He did not understand it as language. He understood it as intent. He did not answer. He pressed the lantern switch with his thumb and flooded the tent with light, sudden and full, the brightest setting, the tent walls going bright orange in all directions. He did not know why he did this. Instinct, he told the truck driver. The same instinct that had kept him from answering the voice. Not a decision, but a physical response to something his body understood before his mind caught up. The voice outside stopped. He sat in the lit tent and breathed and listened. The creek, the wind, the stove, which had burned down to coals and was producing only a faint ticking now. Nothing from outside the door. Nothing from any wall. Then the tent door flap began to move. Not blown by wind. Moved. From outside, from the bottom edge of the flap lifting with the slow specificity of something that had located the opening and was addressing it deliberately. The flap on this tent was not zippered. It was a canvas overlap with 2 cord loops, one at the top of the opening and one at the midpoint, tied in simple half hitches from the outside. He had tied them himself that morning. He remembered tying them. The lower cord loop came undone. He heard it, a small, dry sound, barely a sound at all, the slight rasp of cord moving through a half hitch, and then the loop releasing. The bottom of the flap shifted, lifted 1 inch, and held. The upper cord was still tied. The flap was open at the bottom by the width of a hand. He did not move. He held the rifle across his knees and looked at the gap at the bottom of the flap, the 1 inch of dark between the bottom of the canvas and the ground. And he thought about the voice, and he thought about the warning, and he thought about 31 years of knowing exactly how 2 syllables should sound, and he made a decision. He said his wife's name. Not the private version, her actual name, the name on her birth certificate, the name her parents had given her, the name her sisters called her, the name on the stone at the cemetery in the county where she grew up. He said it once, clearly, at a normal speaking volume, into the lit tent. Complete silence. The flap did not move. The upper cord did not come undone. From outside the tent, from the south side where the door was, from the direction of the creek to the north, from the east slope where the footsteps had begun, nothing. The kind of silence that follows something, not the kind that precedes nothing. He had said the real name, and the thing outside had not responded to it. He did not know what that meant. He told the truck driver that twice. He did not know what it meant. He only knew that whatever was outside the tent had the private name and not the real one, and that the real name had produced silence where the private name had produced movement, and that he did not have an explanation for why that should matter. But it had mattered, clearly and immediately, and in a way that he could still feel in his hands when he talked about it. He sat in the lit tent with the lantern on full, and he talked. He kept his voice at a conversational level, and he talked about ordinary things, the drive up the mountain on Monday, the gas station where he had stopped, the specific brand of coffee he had brought in his pack that was better than the other brand he sometimes brought, the state of the road above the 3rd switchback. He talked without stopping because the silence, after the voice, felt like an invitation he did not want to accept, and the sound of his own voice about ordinary things felt like the right counter to that. He did not know if it helped. He only knew that as he talked, nothing else happened. He tracked the time on his watch, the old analog one he always brought to the ridge because it did not need charging. 11 p.m. when the voice had come the second time. 11:40 when the flap moved. 12:15, 1 a.m., 2, 3. He talked when the silence felt like pressure and sat quietly when it didn't, and kept the lantern on full and kept the rifle where it was and waited for the east to go gray. It went gray at 5:40. He sat on the cot and looked at the door flap, the upper cord still tied, the lower cord hanging loose where the half hitch had been undone. And he waited until the gray outside had become pale enough to see through the tent fabric, and then waited until it was pale enough to mean full daylight, and then he reached forward and untied the upper cord himself. His hand was on the flap. The ridge was quiet in the early light. He had been awake for 19 hours, and still in the same position for the last 6 of them. The stove had gone cold sometime before 3. His coffee had gone cold before midnight. He had not eaten since dusk. He held the flap and sat and breathed and thought about what might be on the other side of it. Then he opened it. The ridge was gray and still in the early light, the kind of November morning that has no color in it yet, just shapes and degrees of dark resolving slowly into forms he could name. He came out of the tent low and stood up outside it and looked. The campsite was undisturbed. The rock ring held ash from the previous evening's fire. The folding stool was where he had left it. The split wood was stacked against the outcropping to the northwest, the pile he had built the afternoon before, neat and sufficient. His boots were outside the tent door where he had placed them before going inside the night before. He always left them there, toes pointing away from the door, the habit of decades of camp mornings. The toes were pointing toward the tent, both boots, reoriented in the night to face inward, toward the door, as if someone had picked them up and replaced them facing the opposite direction. He looked at them for a moment and then looked at the surrounding ground. The impressions were visible in the soft earth and the flattened, frost-stiff grass around the tent perimeter. Not clean tracks, the ground was too mixed for that. Too much leaf litter and compressed grass and the irregular surface of a site that had been used for many seasons. But the pressed-down record of weight was there, a continuous line of compression moving around the tent in the way he had heard the footsteps moving. He walked the perimeter and confirmed it, the way he confirmed things, methodically, without hurrying, reading the ground the way a man reads ground when he has been doing it for a long time. 2 circuits. He could trace both of them. The impressions deepened at the south side, at the door, where something had stood for a significant time. The impressions ended at the fire ring. He stood at the fire ring and looked in every direction, north toward the creek, east toward the slope, south along the ridge, west toward the valley. The compressed grass and disturbed leaf cover that marked the circuits around the tent ended cleanly at the fire ring's perimeter and did not continue. There were no tracks leading away from the camp in any direction. Whatever had circled the tent had not left, or had left in a way that did not produce marks, which was the same problem stated differently. He stood in the gray morning and looked at the fire ring, and then looked at his boots facing the wrong way, and then looked at the tent door with its one cord hanging, and its one cord he had untied himself, and he made the same kind of decision he had made throughout the night. Not a brave one, just a practical one. He was going to pack the camp and go down the mountain. He was going to do it now, in the early light, without eating and without coffee, and without breaking the camp down in its usual organized way. He was going to put everything in the bags and get off the ridge. He was pulling the tent stakes when he found the photograph. He did not immediately understand what he was seeing. He was on the south side of the tent, crouched, working the last stake out of the frozen ground, when his hand came down on a flat, dry surface on a rock near the tent door. The rock was small, about the size of a fist, with a slight concave upper surface that had kept it dry despite the overnight frost. On it, face up, precisely centered, was a photograph. He knew the photograph. It was the one he carried in the left breast pocket of his canvas coat, a photograph of his wife from the summer before she got sick, standing at the edge of a field somewhere in the county where she grew up, squinting slightly into the sun, her hair shorter than she usually wore it that year. He had carried that photograph in that pocket every hunting season for 4 years. He reached for the breast pocket. The button was fastened. He undid it and reached inside. The pocket was empty. He stood with the photograph in his hand and the empty pocket open and looked at the image, her face, the field behind her, the quality of the summer light, the slight squint. And he could not locate a rational sequence of events that accounted for the photograph being on that rock. The pocket buttoned from the outside. He had buttoned it himself before going into the tent the previous evening, the habitual check he made every time he went inside so nothing fell out in the night. He had been in the tent since then. He had not taken the photograph out. He had not placed it on the rock. It was face up. It was facing the tent door. It had been placed, not dropped, centered on the dry surface of the rock with a precision that was not accidental. He held the photograph and stood in the gray morning and thought about what the man at the gas station had said, and thought about the private name spoken from the creek side, and thought about the real name spoken into the lit tent and the silence that had followed. And he thought about the voice with the right phonetic shape and the wrong weight on the syllables, the thing that had her name but not the knowledge of how she said it. He thought about the photograph facing the tent, facing the door, the way you orient something that is meant to be seen by whoever comes out. He told the truck driver in the diner that it hadn't felt threatening. He said this carefully, aware of how it sounded, aware that nothing else about the night had been anything other than frightening. But the photograph on the rock, face up, facing him, on the one dry surface available, had felt like something being returned. He did not know what to do with that. He said it twice. He did not know what to do with that, and he was not sure he was supposed to. He packed the camp without eating. He worked steadily and without rushing, the way he had worked every camp breakdown for 22 years, because the methodology was the thing that kept the situation from becoming something he could not manage. He got the tent down and the stove cold packed and the bags loaded and the rack of branches dismantled, and he was off the ridge and at the trailhead in under 2 hours, which was faster than he had ever come down. He put everything in the truck and sat in the driver's seat for a moment and looked at the photograph, which he had put on the dashboard in front of him. Then he put it in the breast pocket and buttoned the pocket. He stopped at the gas station in town on the way out. The same man was behind the counter, the one from Monday morning, who had told him about the creek side, who had asked if he was going alone. He bought a coffee and paid for it, and was at the door when the man spoke. "You make it off Craddock?" He said yes. The man nodded, the slow nod of someone receiving information they half expected. "Did you answer it?" He said no. The man looked at him for a moment with the level, assessing look of someone who has had this conversation before in various forms and knows how to read the person across from him. Then he said, "Good. Some of them stop when you don't." He did not ask what the man meant by some of them. He did not ask how many kinds there were, or what the others did, or how the man knew what he knew. He thanked him and went to his truck and drove north. He had not been back to Craddock Ridge. He hunts closer to town now, on a lease with a cousin who does not ask too many questions, and they are always back before dark. He does not camp overnight in the field alone. His cousin knows he prefers to be back before dark and accommodates this without comment, because in that part of Virginia, among people who have spent real time in the woods, preferences about darkness are not considered unusual. The photograph is in a frame on the wall of his living room now, not in his pocket. He had it framed the week after he came down from the ridge. He said he wanted it somewhere he could see it properly, which was true, and he said he wanted it out of the pocket, which was also true, and he did not elaborate on why the pocket had started to feel like the wrong place for it. He does not discuss the trip except once, to the truck driver, in that diner, at 6 a.m. He finished his account and sat for a moment and then said the thing he had said he needed to say at the beginning of it. Whatever it was, it knew her name. The one only I used. I need you to understand what that means. I haven't figured it out yet. I don't think I'm supposed to. Then he left exact change on the table for the coffee he had not finished and walked to the door and stopped once with his hand on the frame. Not turning around, just stopping. The way a person stops when they are deciding whether there is anything else that needs to be said. Apparently, there wasn't. He went out into the parking lot, and the truck driver watched him through the diner window as he got into his truck. A dark green pickup with a dent in the rear panel, and sat for a moment without starting it. Then he drove north and was gone. The truck driver sat in the booth for a while after that. He drank the rest of his coffee and looked at his notebook and read back through what he had written and then closed it. The road south had opened while the man was talking, and he should have been moving. But he sat for another few minutes with the closed notebook in front of him, and the diner sounds around him. The coffee machine, the waitress refilling someone at the counter, a radio somewhere in the kitchen playing something he couldn't quite hear. The notebook is in the glove compartment of his truck. He has not thrown it away. He thought about it once, about 6 months after the conversation, when the account had settled into the category of things he carried without knowing what to do with them. He opened the glove compartment and looked at it, and closed the glove compartment again. He still stops at that diner when he runs the Eastern Kentucky to Virginia route. He does not know why exactly, except that it is a reasonable place to stop, and the coffee is acceptable, and he has not encountered another man in hunting clothes with that particular look on his face, the look of someone who needs the account to exist somewhere outside of themselves. Not yet.